Hello, welcome or welcome back to my channel. I'm Ruby, this is Ruby Red, and today we're gonna find out what my favorite book of the year was. Every year since I've had this channel, I have done this little book bracket project. I have made a graphic that you can use. It is linked down below. You can download that and run your own books through the brackets and see what happens. Basically, I put my favorite book from each month onto this board, and then they battle it out to find out what my favorite book of the year was. It's always really fun, and I try to arrange the books a little bit differently every year, so it's not always January versus February, March versus April. It's sort of shuffled around. So I'm interested to know if anybody has already done their own book bracket for this past year, 2023, and done the January to February matchups. If you then put all of your books into my matchups, does it change your results? I'm just kind of interested in that. To be honest, I did already film this and I had some technical problems with the footage. So this is take two. So I kind of already know what books I'm picking, but since sitting with my decisions from the first trial, I think I made some wrong choices, so I'm going to try to remedy those. So there might still be a little bit of a surprise for me in this, but we'll see. In January of 2023, I read 5 books. My average rating was 3.8 stars, and none of them were 5 stars. But out of the 4-star books that I read this month, the best one was Under the Banner of Heaven by Jon Krakauer. I think Into Thin Air made it onto my favorites book bracket, maybe even to my top 3. The year before, and I think it's only right that Under the Banner of Heaven makes it this year because it was a truly phenomenal read. It is a true crime journalistic piece of writing. It's about the Mormon Church, the history of the Mormon Church, and also some murders that happened related to interpretations of Mormon doctrines, etc. So it was really interesting. I didn't know that much about the history of Mormonism and all that, so it was really interesting to see that all laid out. Also to get into some of the really wacky stuff that happened. So really great read. Now in February, I read 9 books. I had a 3.5 average rating, and again, no 5 stars, but several 4 stars. And there's one that I think very fondly of, and it's Legends and Lattes. Now, this was a huge phenomenon. It's a cozy fantasy. It's about an orc who wants to stop going on quests. Anyway, she's laying down her sword and she's gonna open a coffee shop, and just the found family, the people that she meets along the way, coffee shop fantasy, the baked goods, the little friends, the really, really low stakes drama. It was really cozy and sweet. I loved reading it. It was a warm hug to me. I didn't give it 5 stars because I didn't think it was a perfect, amazing, phenomenal, best book ever, but it has stuck with me, and so it's gonna be my February pick because I really enjoyed reading it. Okay, March. I read 11 books in March with an average rating of 3.6, and I had 2 5 stars. One of them was East of Eden by John Steinbeck, which I did love reading. It is a really long piece of classic American lit. It is about 2 families, I guess, maybe 3 families. And it's all very biblical, sort of a Cain and Abel retelling, if you will, to use the modern terminology for such things. And I found that to be a really engaging story. It was really fun to read. I'm definitely interested in rereading it again sometime in my life. I think it would be phenomenal a second go around. But the book that was my favorite for March is actually In an Absent Dream by Seanan McGuire. This is book 4 in the Wayward Children series. That's a series about children who go through doors into magical other worlds, and what happens to them in the worlds, and then also maybe what happens to them when they come back out and how they're changed by their time there and whatever. So I think in general, people's favorite book from this series is the one with the world that they would have gone to. The one where you were most that's where I would have ended up if I went through a door. And I do think that that's true of me because in An Absent Dream, our main character Lundy goes through a door and she ends up at the Goblin Market. So everything is barter and trade, and everything has fair value. It's all about making deals and like honest bartering, really. And if you manipulate the system or you don't pay fair value, you slowly turn into a bird. And to me, that's not that bad. I even would like that. If I had to turn into an animal, I'd like to turn into a bird. So I really liked this one. I also just really liked the way that her story was structured, where it sort of skipped over the action-y parts and we just got to like exist in the aftermath of like extreme adventure, and we didn't have to read the adventure. It was just like, okay, like you did your quest, like now what? Like what happens? What does that do to your friendships, etc. So I love that one. Oh gosh, we're moving on to April. I read 7 books in April. I had a 3.4 average rating, which is not too good. I did have 2 5-star books. One of them was Homesick by Jennifer Croft, which is just like a sort of like a fictionalized memoir by a translator about becoming a translator, I guess, and languages. And also it was translated, like she wrote it in not her first language and then translated it back to her first language. Very interesting. I really liked the story. I liked reading it. But my favorite from April was Briefly a Delicious Life, which is a phenomenal book that Lizzie picked for a book club, Bailey's book club, and I adored it. So it's about it's dual timeline, has 2 perspectives from the story. Half the book is about this girl Blanca. She lived on this island in France in the 1300s and she died, and now she haunts this abbey. So we're getting her story of like, how did she end up dead as a 13-year-old and haunting this abbey? I think she was 13. And then the other part of the story is the 1800s, when maybe it was 19, I think it was the 1800s, whatever. Chopin is one of the characters. He is very ill and he's visiting this island like for his health, with his lover, a writer, and her children. We're getting to hear their story of how they ended up in this weird, sad, wet place, how sick he is, how weird they are, and how they're trying to like make the best of it, but the townspeople kind of hate them. And we're also getting to hear their story a little bit from Blanca's perspective and how she is like taking a big bite out of their life, basically. Like she's able to enjoy sensations and taste and everything through the living. So she loves this like group of lively, excited people who are like in her home territory, and she becomes really attached to them. And just the descriptions of music, that was something that was really delicious to Blanca, and like love and laughter and play. Like it just like the whole thing was really sad but also really phenomenal. I loved it, and I especially loved the musical elements because I was able to like look up the Chopin like work that he was working on or that they were talking about in the book and listen to it and like follow along with how Blanca described it. Like it's just so good. Okay, we have to move on, but what a good book. May. I read 7 books in May. I had a 3.8 average rating. This is the time of year when I was trying to read all of the books for the Women's Prize for Fiction shortlist. And I failed at that. I didn't do it really, and I never made a video about it or anything, but I did read some great books. And 2 of the greatest books were The Marriage Portrait by Maggie O'Farrell and Demon Copperhead by Barbara Kingsolver. Now, 2 authors that I have adored before. They're well loved, I think. Demon Copperhead won the Women's Prize, and I thought it was really phenomenal, but I also thought The Marriage Portrait was really phenomenal. And this is a really hard choice for me because yes, like Demon Copperhead, I have more specific criticisms to make, namely that I do think it was just slightly too long, but it was really impactful. It just told the whole story of this guy Demon's life, living mid opioid crisis in Appalachia in America, and it just like really laid it all out. It really laid it all out on the table. I thought it was terrific, but it was supremely long. The Marriage Portrait, not as long. And at the time, I do think that was my favorite, but I definitely don't think about it as often. But it was about a young woman, a Medici, maybe she married into the Medici family in Italy in the 15 something, I don't know. Historical fiction. She was very young and kind of a free-spirited girl when she gets married, and she has to like figure out how to live this new life. And she sits for this extremely stuffy portrait, the marriage portrait. Meanwhile, she's an artist herself, so she's doing her own portraits, her own paintings, and reading about all of that was just really interesting. And I loved her spirit and her attitude. I loved her as a character. And so picking between those two is really hard for me. I think I'm gonna say The Marriage Portrait, because even though I don't think about it as often, I do think about it more fondly. Let's go with that. Okay, June. I read so much in June. I read 28 books. I had a 3.5 average rating. I had a couple of 5 stars. There's 2 that are the most interesting to me. One of them was Summer Water, which is a short book by Sarah Moss. And it's about all of these families that have cabins around this lake, and they're all in their cabins this one weekend in the summer, and it is pouring rain the whole time. And we just get to hear a little bit from each of them, like all of the characters, just like what they did on this day and how they think about the other people in the cabins. It was just like a very like insulated sort of situation, but you got just so many perspectives, and you know, everyone thinks XYZ about this one family, and then when you're reading from their perspective, you kind of are like, oh, it's actually not like that, it's like this. I really like stories like that. It was not a lot of plot, it was just a character exploration, I guess, which I really liked. And the other 5-star was The Charm Offensive by Alison Cochrane, which I did really love. It was a romance that's set on basically The Bachelor, where the Bachelor, Prince Charming in this fictionalized version, falls in love instead of with one of the girls on the show, with his producer, and they're both like have some mental health problems that come into play. And it's just a beautiful story about like representation and like exploring and understanding your sexuality and like leaning on other people for help. But it was a romance. I don't know. I think I'm gonna give it to Charm Offensive because it floored me how much I liked that book, and I don't think another romance is gonna make this list. July, I read 3 books. I had an average rating of 4, which is pretty good, but only one of those was 5 stars, and that was Migrations by Charlotte McConaughey. This is a piece of climate fiction set in the near future, where mass extinctions have continued to happen, and our main character is this woman who is obsessed with Arctic terns, which have the longest migration of any bird, and because of what's happening in the world, she's pretty sure this is going to be the last time they ever attempt their migration from like almost the North Pole to almost the South Pole, and she's determined to follow them. And so we are slowly learning her backstory and like what happened to her, why she's like this, and what happened to the world, and how she became like a kind of a weird version of a climate activist, climate scientist, and also her journey to like try and make this happen and like find these birds. And it had a lot of interesting, I think, discussion about climate crisis, but also it was so fascinating to read her because she's a really unhinged kind of character. She's not well, and she's just so obsessed with her mission, and I sort of was obsessed with her mission. So I really loved that book. That's my favorite from July. Okay, August, I read 8 books. I had an average rating of 3.5. And I only had 1 5-star, and that was What My Bones Know by Stephanie Fu. This was a phenomenal book. It's about complex PTSD. It's a memoir of this woman, Stephanie, and she experienced severe trauma as a child, severe and extended amounts of abuse. So when you experience long-term kinds of abuse, you're going to develop complex PTSD instead of the regular variety, which comes from like one event. So this is her sort of finding out about this different diagnosis and how it's been impacting her whole life, how it continues to impact her life, and various available treatments, and how she's trying to find out like how to heal, how to recover. And it was really good. It was heartbreaking. It was really hard to read about her childhood. There's also a lot of intersection with being a first generation, like a child of immigrants in America, and how that sort of changed her experience of her trauma. It was a really phenomenal read, but it was rough, but worth it, I think. Now we have September. I read 6 books in September with a 3.8 and 3 5-star books. And my favorite from September was definitely Ship of Destiny by Robin Hobb. This is the 3rd book in the Live Ship Traders series. It was the finale. It was so good. It was so good. This series is set in a fantasy world where there is this one kind of wood that if you make a ship out of it, and then 3 generations die on the ship basically comes to life. The figurehead can move and speak. It has its own personality. And these are really coveted ships because they just sail better, because they can just, they're alive. So they're better boats. And so they give the families who own these boats an advantage in their like trading business. And that's the main industry of this region, is trading. So that's like the overall premise, but you follow so many different characters, like maybe like 11 points of view, I feel like, throughout all of these books. And they're all so interesting. There are some like really twisted guys. There's this one guy, Kenneth, he wants to be king of the pirates. There's Wintro, he's just a little guy at the beginning. He's the youngest son of this family. Oh no, he's not. He's the oldest son of this family. But he's young, and we sort of get to watch his whole like growth from being just like a little kid who was actually sent off to become a monk, and now he's not becoming a monk. And his POV is so interesting. We've got Althea, she's the oldest. No, she's not. But she wanted the boat, whatever. There's so many perspectives, and the world is just so full and complex, and the characters, like it's just, that series is amazing. So the final book of the trilogy, absolutely phenomenal. All right, let's talk about October. I only read 2 books in October. Average rating of 4. And the 5-star one was Tess of the D'Urbervilles by Thomas Hardy. This is a classic, and it's about this girl Tess, and her dad sort of discovers that their family was like very distantly related to the D'Urberville family, which was like a landed gentry sort of a thing. And that kind of ruins her life. You know, she's just like trying to get by. She doesn't have any big like ambitious like designs. Like she's really like she's just a girl. She's happy with whatever she can get, but because of the ambitions of her drunk father, she just gets roped into all kinds of trouble. I really, really liked it, and I want to read more Thomas Hardy. Okay, November. 7 books, 3.4 average rating, 2 5-stars. Assassin's Apprentice, another Robin Hobb book, is the first book in the entire series. That was a reread for me. So we're going to go with the second 5-star, which was Giovanni's Room by James Baldwin. This is a book about a man named David. He's an American. He's living in Paris, and it's about the beginning and the end of his relationship with this man named Giovanni. And it was really good. Okay, the last month, the last choice that we have to make was in December. I read 7 books in December. I had an average rating of 4, but there are 4 5-star books in December. This is tough because these are the ones that I read recently, right? Like I finished Jade City, for example, on the last day of the year. And no, you know what? I don't care if it's recency bias. My favorite from December was Jade City by Fonda Lee. It's the first book in the Greenbone saga. And it's set in this fantasy world based off of China, I think. And the Greenbones are people who are able to harness the power of this one type of jade that is mined in their country. And it can just heighten all their senses. It just makes them more perceptive. It is more than just heightened senses. Like it is magical. Like you have abilities, but they're just based on the senses, kind of. Like there's like strength and steel and deflection, I think, and perception. There's a bunch. And it's just so interesting. The more jade that you wear on your person, the stronger you are, but it has like a kind of addictive, and you can't put on too much jade too fast. It makes you sick. And if you're not a Greenbone, if you don't have their particular version of like resistance to the jade, if you're just like a regular guy and you try to wear jade, you will lose your mind. So it's about this gang of Greenbones, the No Peak clan, and how they are dealing with like a shift in the power structure and the leadership of their clan. And it was really good. There's something about the jade experience, like that is like has this spiritual slant to it that I just really liked. So yeah, phenomenal book. That was my December favorite. Okay, now we're gonna have to get into the hard stuff, but I think I have to let my dog out. Be right back. Okay, back to work. Now let's just do our matchups like going around. Starting with, Under the Banner of Heaven versus The Marriage Portrait. Now, this one I'm going to give to The Marriage Portrait because that was a 5-star read, and Under the Banner of Heaven was only 4 stars, but still, I feel like this top 12 is pretty good. Okay, so The Marriage Portrait. Now we move on to Tess of the D'Urbervilles versus In an Absent Dream. This is one of the matchups that's so hard because they're so different. Like, Tess of the D'Urbervilles is a really long classic book, and In an Absent Dream is a really short portal fantasy novel. So do I move forward the one that I think is like a better, I don't know. I think my love for In an Absent Dream was very personal, whereas Tess of the D'Urbervilles I think could be widely enjoyed and appreciated. But In an Absent Dream I think about more and has had a larger impact on me. So I guess that's who's moving up in the world. Next we have Jade City versus The Charm Offensive. And again, recency bias, but I'm going with Jade City. That was a phenomenal book. Excellent, excellent. I think even if you're not somebody who reads a lot of fantasy, you would still really enjoy it because it was so good. Oh, okay. Next we have Giovanni's Room versus What My Bones Know. I'm gonna say What My Bones Know. I loved Giovanni's Room though, I need you to know that, but I'm gonna move forward with What My Bones Know because it was more impactful. Now we have Ship of Destiny versus Briefly Delicious Life, and this is tough only because my love for Ship of Destiny comes from the fact that it was like the end of a series that is altogether like 2,500 pages. So there's just a lot of time for you to know and love all these characters. But I think a very similar level of devotion between me and the characters was achieved in Briefly a Delicious Life. And for that reason, I'm going to move it forward because I think it was just such a feat, such an interesting premise and such phenomenal execution. So but I love Robin Hobb, but I'm moving forward with Briefly a Delicious Life. Thank you. And finally, Migrations versus Legends and Lattes. This is another situation where Legends and Lattes only got 4 stars. Migration was a 5-star book. So we're moving forward with Migrations. That is the winner here. So now we've got a top 6. It's time to pick our top 3. Okay, first up, The Marriage Portrait versus In an Absent Dream. This is where The Marriage Portrait is going to jump to the front of the pack. Now, Jade City versus What My Bones Know. This is another really hard one because they're so different. What My Bones Know. That was really hard, but it's gonna be What My Bones Know. I think Stephanie Fu wrote a really good book, and I'm concerned that my love for Jade City is simply that I'm still like high off of finishing it so recently, and the ending was really intense. So maybe I'm being overly cautious, but that is my choice. Now we're moving into our final matchup, which is Briefly a Delicious Life versus Migrations, 2 phenomenal books. And I'm gonna pick Briefly a Delicious Life, even though Migrations was really good, because it did so much for me. That book was phenomenal. So that's my third top 3. So now we have my top 3. I have a historical literary fiction, I have a nonfiction that is like kind of about mental health, and then I have another historical literary fiction with some like speculative elements. So this is the books that I love, I guess. I do love historical literary fiction, and I do love mental health nonfiction. I am sorry I didn't sneak a fantasy in here, but Briefly a Delicious Life is like a little bit, the ghost character makes it like a little bit speculative, like I said. Okay, so now this top 3 has a clear winner to me, which is Briefly a Delicious Life. That's right, that's my favorite book of the year. I feel like I thought that earlier in the year, like when I read it, I was kind of like, this is gonna be one of my favorite books of the year, isn't it? And yes, it is. So thank you so much, Lizzie, for picking that book. And I would love to know what your favorite book of the year is. Let me know. I'm so happy. This was hard, but I'm glad that I redid it because I did change some of my choices, and that did change the final result into one that I feel is true. I think when I made my first selections, I was trying to be somebody I'm not. So there you go. Thank you so much for watching. Like I said, the link for this graphic is going to be in the description below. and I'll see you back here sometime soon for another video. Thank you. Goodbye.